as you know, the where predators hide presentation is kind of based on, predators hiding in places where they get access to their prey. Now, with the workplace, this sometimes becomes more predation of opportunity and less predation of design. Now, I'm not saying there isn't creepy people out there that specifically get jobs to go to certain places, but those people kind of land more in the like getting close to children, getting close to women, getting close to elderly jobs. This is more the corporate sector where the predation isn't, I don't want to say it's not as dangerous. I want to say the most prevalent version of predation in the workplace is more creeper based than it is full-on sexual assault. Now, obviously those happen. If you look at the Harvey Weinstein, the Me Too movements, all that stuff will kind of be addressed. But I want to focus on the stats, the reporting, the misinformation on how to report if people even get information on reporting at all. I want to talk about the field where it looks like women are getting harassed more often. There isn't any field where men are getting harassed more often. So that's kind of an interesting point to point out. But I do have stats here for men being harassed as well. And I only have one stat, unfortunately, for the LGBTQ2 plus community for that, because again, the data for that isn't nearly as prevalent. Starting off with kind of the problem. And the problem here is 1 in 4 women and 1 in 6 men have reported inappropriate behavior or sexualized behavior in the workplace in 2020. I found this interesting. I was looking for older stats because 2020 was the year that we all moved to mostly online workplace, right? So I found it very fascinating that the amount of harassment didn't change from 2018 when there was no pandemic to 2020 where there was a pandemic. So I found it very interesting that harassment is going to happen no matter what the medium is. And so even with the opportunity thing, it pops up of like, oh, okay, you see Bill at the water cooler every day and you think Bill's cute and he doesn't approve it. So he feels uncomfortable when you talk about his body or whatever you're doing. That's not going to pop up as organically with Zoom meetings. But there's some really interesting metrics and data that came up that we'll talk about of why this is still a thing. So the stats haven't changed in the last 4 years. And again, the sample size of in-person versus at least a year of not in-person, because I only have the data from 2020, the numbers didn't switch. So working from home didn't make you any less protected from sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior. In fact, it seemed to have increased one of the lowest areas of harassment, which is sharing of explicit material. So that one actually went up, people sharing explicit material, obviously because we're on Zoom, we're on Facebook, we're on Instagram, we're communicating through Messenger, through Teams, through whatever, Google Drive, whatever you're using. So the sharing of inappropriate material not obviously, but interestingly, jumped up. The 3 major areas where they were tracking data in sexual harassment and inappropriate behavior was inappropriate communication, sexually explicit materials, and physical contact or sexual relations. Now, of those 3 things, the highest one by far was inappropriate communication. And that shouldn't come as any surprise. Most people are willing to say things that they won't do, although people will do things they say. But more people are willing to be verbally inappropriate with off-color jokes, maybe nicknames, maybe things that are seen as inappropriate in the workplace. Explicit materials was, interestingly, the only area of all the areas where men were more harassed was with explicit material. So this is probably the dude bros sharing their information. And then somebody on the chain is like, I don't want to see this, religious beliefs or maybe different sexual orientation. Maybe they just don't like gross stuff. Like not all dudes are super into like nipple pictures every 35 seconds, right? So I found that neat that was the area where men had the only place where there was more than women. And then physical contact or suggested sexual relations, obviously more dominant with women. So with inappropriate communications, 22% of women said that they experience inappropriate communication. And we're going to talk about a reporting error. We're going to spend a lot of time on it because I actually made a whole separate infographic on it because reporting and knowing where to report, how to report is heavily lacking according to the numbers in most workplaces. But the numbers we have right now for sexual misconduct includes like inappropriate behavior. 22% of women inappropriate communication, 15% of men, inappropriate communication. 2% of women say they receive sexually explicit materials over email, social media, or in physical form. 3% of men. And then last but not least was physical contact or suggested sex relations. 12% of women reported this happening and 4% of men had it happen. That then brings us to the next point of, with COVID, with Me Too, with all the things that are happening to actually push forward the proper agenda, which is transparency, reporting, all the things we talk about in every single one of these classes. It always seems to come to rules that are enforced and transparency of the rules and how to enforce and report. And this seems to be where most places are dropping the ball. But what we're seeing is, walk with me on this analogy. The TSA, so trust me, I'll bring it on, I promise. The TSA and airport security has stopped 0 terrorist attacks, 0. They've done 0. So a lot of people call it security theater, which means, it looks like you're safe, but they've actually stopped nothing, because all they know what to look for is the stuff that already happened. They're not looking for the evolution of terrorism. They're not learning about the evolution of what people are doing. So the TSA can only stop things that have already happened. It can't stop the new evolutions. This is what's happening with sexual harassment in the workplace. Is Me Too got rid of all of the old way of doing sexual harassment, which is awesome. But now these predators and creeps are moving forward and adapting their methods. So, like I said, harassment hasn't dropped since we went online, which means there had to be an evolution and an adaptation to ways that people were communicating. Now, obviously a big tip on this, and it would go with the boundary setting course. In the boundary setting course, we talk about, what communication we should be giving, what access we should be allowing to people. And the issue with the explicit materials, the issue with the harassment is that in this digital age, people are more willing to give out their personal stuff, their personal Facebook, their personal Instagram, their personal email, which then becomes the route that these harassers go through. Now, when we're working professionally, and again, if you want to meet somebody at your workplace, you can disregard all these rules. We're under the assumption that, you don't want to meet somebody at your workplace, or this person's creepy or inappropriate. When you're at work, you should only be giving work contact to people. So let's say, for example, 2 people get hired 80-20. I shouldn't be like, follow me on Instagram, follow me here and follow me there. I should be like, this is my email for work, randy@8020cms.com. Only email me here. This is where I get a hold of, or only call me on my work phone. Not giving out personal numbers, not giving out personal social media or emails or that kind of stuff. The issue is that social media, we're looking at the people paying attention to what they're giving out, because then that allows the harassment and the explicit material that people aren't expecting. If it's going through a work channel, that's all recorded usually by the workplace. So especially if it's intranet, not intranet, then there's IT and security, all that kind of stuff, and it can be traced. It becomes harder and harder, the degrees of separation for HR. You go from your work stuff to your personal stuff. It doesn't become impossible, but it becomes harder, and it becomes a he said, she said kind of thing, as opposed to using a work email where everything's accessible. So with the shift of the predation, a lot of predators and creeps. I just want to say predators, there's also creeps, right? So my favorite creep that I always talk about is office massage guy. Office massage guy is a guy that I actually knew when I was working in advertising. So that's why I always bring up this character, but I think it's important story to tell, especially in this lesson. So it's 2004, 2005. So we're way before Me Too. We're way before people are telling racist jokes in workplaces. I think smoking was pretty much still allowed in bars. This is way back when. I was working in advertising, and advertising, as we'll talk about later, is primarily in male-driven fields. Women are way more likely to be harassed. So, but like transportation, construction, those kind of things, the odds of you getting harassed, the odds of a member of the opposite sex getting harassed are 50 or 49% in those areas, where overall there were 22% everywhere else. So, and I'm sure some of the people on this call who work at work sites can confirm this anecdotally, that when you're working on a site with all dudes, it becomes a little bit more of a harassment area. I looked a little bit to see if the opposite happened. So let's say, for example, a man went to a primarily dominant female field, didn't see any correlation. I don't know, maybe men aren't reporting, maybe nothing's happening. But the numbers we do have is when you're primarily in a male-driven field, if you're a female, harassment is very, very common. So we're all outside sales reps, which means we only met once every week. and we'd have meetings. And during the meeting, we had one old guy. He was the office creep, and we all knew it. And we told every woman that worked for us, like, look, this guy's a creep, stay away from him, blah, blah, blah. But he's been here forever. They're not going to fire him. Go to HR, do what you want, but nothing's going to happen. And he was office massage guy. And he made everybody uncomfortable, but he never crossed that line. He never went past physical touching. And if somebody actually complained about it, he would stop, but he would negotiate first. He was a salesperson. So he'd be like, are you sure? Like, oh, don't worry, blah, blah, blah. And he would try to like weasel his way back into allowing massage. He never crossed the line, never hit on anybody at a Christmas party. He never got too drunk and attacked anybody that we know of. Maybe he did. To my knowledge, is probably better. This never happened. And none of the women told me. And so most women are very comfortable talking about that kind of stuff. I was the guy that would fight, right? It was a martial arts guy. So if there was an issue, that was usually brought up. I didn't hear anything. Doesn't mean it didn't happen. But that was kind of my first foray into the office creep. Now, remember, predators have a scale, right? We have all the way to the horrific, like we talk about child molesters and that kind of stuff. And then we have all the way down to like just weirdo creeps that like to make people uncomfortable, right? Like to tell uncomfortable jokes, like to make racist comments. They get power out of somebody feeling uncomfortable and them getting away with it. A lot of people just want to get away with stuff. They're not even trying to gain something. They're just trying to show they can do what they want. So these people usually was in power, like office massage guy in my story. He'd been there a long time. It was very hard to get rid of him or reprimand him. And he didn't really do anything at the time that was outside of HR standards because it looked like it was implied consent. Nobody said anything. Obviously, if this happened now, this would be a totally different story. But again, that's why I set the setting. Looking at it like that and understanding that just because the person isn't physically raping you or just because the person isn't physically punching you or kidnapping you doesn't mean they're not a predator, doesn't mean they're not predating on you. They just might have a specific way to be a predator. Now, this is the problem with the process-based predators is their targets, their needs, and their drives vary so much. Right? Some people might be driven by sex. Some people might be driven by power. Some people might be driven by making people uncomfortable. Some people might be driven by smell, sight. This is why it's a quagmire of a solve. Because I can't just be like, here's 3 quick tips to stop all predators, because every hunter hunts different, right? Every hunter hunts different prey. And we don't know the kind of prey they're hunting, unfortunately, until they attack that prey. So realizing, understanding, using our instincts and paying attention, that kind of stuff, creepy people, they might not go all the way, but doesn't mean it's okay, right? So there shouldn't be these office massage guys. There shouldn't be inappropriate touching. There shouldn't be people making jokes because, so again, back in 2003, this is where Randy wasn't great. We had a gay member of our security team. And I had gay friends in high school, but I was never corrected on how to talk to them. So it always kind of became like, oh, let's make fun of them to bring them into the group because my love language is bullying. It's stupid, but it's true. Talk to my daughter or fiance. But I don't do that to everybody anymore, but it used to be like that. So I used to make fun of everybody. This blew up my face a couple times, once with this security member, once with another person that worked for me who was of a different race, and I was making too much fun of the race, and I had to evolve and grow. When we were doing that back then, guy's name was Matt. When Matt was there, he was in a very dominated male cis field. So we thought he was cool to us making fun of him, but he was just accepting it to be part of the group. He didn't like it. It wasn't okay, but because of the time and the place, he put up with it. And this is the issue when it comes to workplace harassment and violence, is a lot of people are just swallowing it in order to keep their position, in order to make sure they don't lose their job, in order to fit in order to make things easier. We're going to talk about that in a second on why this is so very, very underreported. Moving on, getting into the reporting portion of the class. So everybody should know that it is illegal, obviously, to harass people in your workplace. You can't judge on orientation. You can't judge on culture. You can't judge on any of that kind of stuff. Harassment, bullying, and obviously sexual harassment are all off the table. But they're only off the table if there's a system in place to punish or remove the offender. Now, when surveyed, 32% of women and 26% of men said that they had no idea who to talk to or how to report what their sexual harassment policies were. So if somebody had harassed them, 32% of women said they didn't know what to do. They didn't know who to talk to. They didn't know what forms to fill out. They didn't know what the repercussions were. They didn't know if it was anonymous, if it was public, if you face your accuser or not. There was a lot of variables. So when it comes to workplaces like this, obviously, if you don't know what's going to happen if you report, the odds of you reporting drop exponentially because you don't want to lose your job. You don't want to face your assailant. You don't want to whatever, right? And human resources isn't a court of law. They're a totally different thing. You don't have the same rights and protections and liberties and all that kind of stuff when you're in that workplace. So lack of information was one of the major reasons why reporting was so low. The next reason why reporting was so low was that most women, and actually women and men in this one, said that they feared there would be a negative consequence to the reporting. 1 in 5 women, so 20%, who didn't speak to someone about inappropriate behavior that they experienced at work said that they feared negative consequences for their career. So they swallowed it because, the person who did it was in power. They needed a promotion. Or it was the one that everybody liked, which sometimes it is. Or it was creepy office massage guy's been there for a million years. And they feared that not playing along would then negatively impact their career because there was no way to report. They didn't know how to identify. They didn't know how to classify. They probably didn't have the language to know the difference between sexual misconduct, sexual harassment, and sexual assault. They just probably didn't have that language, right? And as weird as it sounds, if you don't have the words to describe what happened to you, the odds of you reporting it are low because you don't want to seem stupid. You don't want to seem like a liar. You want to make a fool of yourself in front of people, especially at your workplace. So when we're looking at these reporting factors, having the language, having it brought out, people knowing what to say, when to say it, what papers they need to fill out, all that kind of stuff is super important. After the negative parts of their career, 1/4 of the women, so 26%, thought that no action would be taken anyway. So 26%, about 1/4, a little bit over, said that even if they did report what was happening, they'd seen before or believed that nothing was going to happen, right? So we're going to jump back to Harvey Weinstein, right? How many actors and actresses did Harvey Weinstein get through before somebody said something? How many people did Bill Cosby get through before somebody said something, right? And it takes that one person to be the domino effect to make other people stand up, because if you don't think you'll be believed and one person stands up and says something and they are believed, then you now think you might be believed. So that's how it domino affects. This is one of the things that bothers me. This is a pet peeve, not part of the presentation. This is one of the pet peeves that bothers me when other instructors say like, oh, well, how come all these women didn't say anything in the first place? They didn't say anything in the first place because they didn't think they're going to be believed. Could you imagine being assaulted by TV's dad, Bill Cosby, and then thinking that you going to the police, anything's going to happen? He's rich, he's powerful, everybody loves him. How do you think Joe Blow, random civilian person, is going to have that happen? The amount of courage the first person had to step up was unbelievable to me. So understanding that, a lot of people have seen it, they've heard it, they know that stuff doesn't get fixed. People don't help, they don't stop it, they don't follow through, right? Especially if you're at a place where you don't even know how to report, why would you think that they're going to follow through if they're not even training how to report on what is happening? So the lack of confidence in the system is another reason why reporting is so low. So 12% of the women stated that they were also too embarrassed or ashamed to discuss what happened. We're going to talk about that in the conclusions. We're going to put a pin in that. When asked whether their employer had given them information on, number one, how to identify sexual harassment, sexual assault, 33% of women said no. And 28% of men said no. They didn't have any idea how to identify workplace sexual harassment or sexual assault. Again, not having lexicon, not knowing how to identify, makes it much harder for somebody to report. Number two, they were asked if they knew how to report workplace sexual harassment and sexual assault. 32% of women said no. 26% of men said no. They had no idea how to do that. How to access resources for workplace sexual harassment and sexual assault confidentially. 34% of women said no, they had no idea, and 28% of men said no, they had no idea how to access that information. That is insane. That is one. If you look at a company like Amazon, if 25% of Amazon's employees didn't know how to address sexual harassment, that's a lot of people in a potential victim pool, right? That is a manager. That is, especially in a larger company. So smaller companies, I'm not giving them a pass, but things get left and swept into the book, right? Like, okay, we're so busy, blah, blah, blah. They need a staff meeting for sexual harassment. We'll skip it. Larger companies where they get removed, that is a red flag of a predatory manager where somebody in power is not trying to give the information out. All workplaces should do this. I'm saying the bigger the corporation, because it gets more and more systemized, the bigger a company gets. It has to be, otherwise it wouldn't run. The more it's ignored there, the more red flags pop up, in my opinion, that the one person is on purpose removing the ability to report because they wish to do stuff. Going back to the in male-dominated fields, I kind of touched on it, but I think it's really important. In male-dominated fields, like I said, women tend to have a tougher time. I did not see an opposite. I did not see and I'm not saying it doesn't exist. I did not see any evidence pointing towards in a female-dominated field, males are more harassed. I didn't see that. I did look, but we did find that in male-dominated fields, women are more likely to be harassed. 49% of the time was in the trades, transportation, and equipment. 49% of of women said they're harassed. Only 14% of men said they're harassed in that. It should be 0 everywhere, but 14 to 49 is a big jump. Reporting in those areas also is shockingly low, right? Because if you're in a male-dominated field, you're trying to prove you're tough, you're trying to prove you're one of the boys, you're going to do the locker room talk. You're going to accept it in a lot more ways. Not everybody, but a lot of people will. They'll swallow that pill like my friend Matt did. Well, just so that's how Matt did it, right? Because he wanted to be part of the group. But eventually it stopped and we were all friends. But it was a hard road for him to start, he said. And this is what a lot of women face in the trades. I know a couple of women that are in the trades. And this is the anecdotal experience I hear from them is, yeah, you got to talk like you're a dude. Otherwise, they're going to call you too soft and you're going to lose your job. You're not going to get career advancement. So you got to kind of be one of the boys, which is bullshit in my opinion. But this seems to be the reality of the world. 1 in 5 LGBTQ2 plus workers experience workplace discrimination due to their sexuality or gender identity. That was the only stat I could find on those communities. There's not a lot of information out there on that. I don't know if it's lack of tracking. I don't know if it's like the forms don't have boxes for it yet because the federal government's slow. All I know is that 1 in 5 to me seems low. I think it's higher because again, we can only gain stats from what people are reporting and who they're talking to. From what I know from my friends in that community, it is higher, but I have no actual statistical data to back that up. Anecdotally, I believe it's higher than 1 in 5. I just think a lot of people are swallowing that pill, unfortunately, to have an easy work life, which needs to be stopped. So all of that in conclusion, there's a couple of things that we really need to change. Number one is we need to look at embarrassment and shame. Embarrassment and shame are tools of the abuser. It doesn't matter who the abuser is. We need to make sure that if somebody is victimized and we know them, that we don't put shame on them. We don't add to their shame. And if we can, we try to alleviate their shame. Everybody says, don't blame the victim. Everybody says, it's not their fault until it happens to you. And then it feels like it is your fault. And it feels like you did something wrong. And it feels like, maybe you did ask for it. And even though you would never allow your friend to talk like that, you would talk like that because it happened to you. If you can remember that when you're empathizing with other people, that's very, very important, right? I never because again, I talk to a lot of people about this kind of stuff. I never let anybody say they made a dumb decision. I never critique them. I never say it was their fault. Obviously, there's things that could have been more optimal, but optimal doesn't mean good or bad. It's just ways to make it easier and more efficient. You can always improve a situation, but that doesn't mean what you did was incorrect. It doesn't mean it was their fault. If we keep allowing shame and embarrassment to be metrics for people, then the amount of reporting will always be low. And abusers will use that to make sure people don't report in. So if we jump a little bit away from this, human traffickers use, I will tell your parents everything you did while you were with me if you run away, as a way to keep people under thumb. If you've done bad things, information over you, if they can blackmail you, if they have these things, embarrassment and shame become very, very powerful tools to keep you under the thumb of a person. That could be a boss, that could be a trafficker, that could be a partner, it could be domestic abuse, it could be lots of areas. We have to do our best to remove shame and embarrassment out of the metric. The next thing we need to do is absolutely make sure that we know the policy. So your homework, everybody, is please Find your human resources policy on sexual harassment and read it. Give it to your friends. Make sure people know about it. Ask people at your workplace if they know what the rules are, and then direct them in the right direction so they can read them. Because you would be surprised how, like you said, 1/4 of the people don't know any of the rules of what's going on. So please, your homework is find your sexual harassment policy and read it. Read it, find it out, decide what's right, what's wrong, challenge it, work it, do the things you need to do, but make sure you're educated on what is and isn't allowed, because I think that's really, really important. The last thing in closing is be aware and try to see if people are just swallowing it, if they're just accepting crappy stuff for the sake of accepting crappy stuff. Now, this is more of a chat to the dudes like me out there where, you didn't notice, you didn't know you're doing something wrong because nobody said anything. That's where we need to be more empathic. We have to change the line in the sand from, well, they didn't say anything, to, yeah, it looked like they were uncomfortable, right? Like, we need to be a little bit more empathetic. We need to pay more attention. This is, again, learning from Randy, because Randy's made all the mistakes, right? This is something I had to learn. Just because nobody spoke up doesn't mean they weren't offended. Just because somebody didn't say something doesn't mean you didn't do something wrong. Now, obviously, the onus is on them to speak up. The onus is on them to set their boundary. The onus is on them to be that person. But we can make it easier, right? When I was in my heyday, I don't want to brag here, but it's part of the story, I was kind of a popular dude in the bar scene. Standing up to me would have been social suicide for a lot of people. I didn't know that. I heard this eventually. I didn't know that, but that's what it looked like to them. I would have stopped immediately. I would have never done anything. But my line then was, if you didn't say it, then it wasn't a thing. Take a lesson from me. Let's move that line back to pay attention. If they're reeling back, if they're upset, if they look upset, check in with them. See if you made a mistake. I'm still doing it. Like, that's what I do, is I'll get over exuberant. I'll say something stupid and I'll see somebody reel back and I'll have to pull them in and be like, oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to do that, blah, 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 blah. This is a learning experience for all of us. I'm not judging anybody. I'm not shaming anybody here. Like we just said, I'm saying, starting now, let's change that line from just because they didn't say something doesn't mean you didn't do something. So feel free to reach out with any questions. And yeah, that's it.